I thank the witnesses for their testimony. I remind each member that he or she will have 5 minutes to question the witnesses. I'll now recognize myself for questions. Mr. Greenblatt, the United States faces increasingly complex and dynamic threat landscape where misinformation like QAnon or anti-Semitic conspiracies have stoked violent acts uh, and spread at lightning speed through social media. What obligations, if any, do you believe online platforms have to minimize the spread of disinformation and misinformation that has homeland or national security implications?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the question. If we are trying to understand why is the threat environment so different today than in previous years or decades or even generations, I would posit that some of what the prior panelist was talking about, the exogenous environment, has something to do with that. And I would also get back to what Professor Idris Miller talked about in terms of the rise of these domestic extremists for various reasons. But make no mistake, the social media services have been a super highway for extremists and hateful organizations. They have allowed them to move, Mr. Chairman, with lightning speed from the margins to the mainstream. Literally, extremists promoting hateful ideas about African Americans, about American Jews, about Muslims, about immigrants, Latinos, LGBTQ, I could go on and on and on, have exploited the lack of any liability at these companies and leveraged their platforms to push out the kind of hate that could never find its way on any mainstream media platforms. And the loophole in the law created by Section 230 and the lack of any moral leadership from these businesses has helped to create this problem. Now, Mr. Chairman, it is both a matter that is an issue that matters to Americans on an individual basis and on a systemic basis. On an individual basis, ADL tracks hate and harassment online every year. And every year we see in our latest survey, which came out in 2021, roughly 41% of users of social media report being harassed online, and 28% report being victimized by serial, sustained harassment. Mr. Chairman, these are children who often find themselves deluged with white supremacist content. And it's not just happening on the social media service. The gaming platforms are a problem. And I got to tell you, as Facebook, which is the place where it happens the most, Mr. Chairman, moves into the metaverse, they seem to be unwilling to do the basics on their current platform, which means you can better believe the metaverse will be filled with even worse issues than what we see right now. Mr. Chairman, if you did one thing as a committee, one thing, focus on the social media companies, hold them accountable for what they're doing, that will be a game changer to mitigate the rise of extremism in America and really around the world.
Thank you. Speaking of platforms, Mr. Rasmussen, you talked a little bit about it, and can you, in short order, and I know this is a challenge, tell us what these companies ought to be doing to help us identify this content?
Sure, Mr. Chairman. And again, in my role at GiftCT, I work with the companies to bring them together to try to develop cross-platform solutions, because the environment that Jonathan described is one in which material or these hateful ideologies can migrate and spread across multiple platforms and create much greater impact and reach. And it's just very difficult to contain once those kinds of toxic ideologies are spreading through that environment. So one of the things we're trying to do at GiftCT is to find ways for the companies to cooperate with each other, to share information across their platforms, so that when something appears on one of them that is of concern to others of them, that they can act on it more quickly, particularly in a crisis management or crisis response scenario, such as we saw with Colleyville 2 weekends ago. Each of the companies has their own platform rules, terms of service, policies that they enforce, and they should be engaged on those policies, rules, and terms of service on their own terms as companies. We don't at GIFCT set those rules, policies, or terms of service. But what we do try to do is together make us more effective as an industry in managing this online environment, and to trying to better identify when it is that this online activity actually translates into real world harm. Because at the end of the day, this is, as your committee knows, about keeping Americans safe. And so we've got to find better ways to figure out when it is that this activity online actually goes further and takes the next step, which is actual violence.